Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Stories, hashtag Candid Conversations with my cousin. My name's Kevin Britz and my wonderful co-host for all the way from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Lauren Britz. How are you doing?
Hi, Kevin. So great to be with you again on this beautiful Monday morning, even though this is pre-recorded for Friday. We're having a smashing old time here in the United States of America. We've got a few things going on. Currently on our doorstep, we have...
Literally, yes. Oh dear.
Names, as you just said, ETA.
Sorry, yes. So hang on, let's just do that again. So currently you've got a whole bunch of stuff on your doorstep. The signal went away. Just say that again.
So currently we have a storm, a tropical storm that's coming over. It's called Storm Eta, but I think that they ran out of names for storms this season, so they just called it ETA.
Yes.
Because nobody had a freaking clue what was going on with this storm. It didn't become a hurricane, luckily, but for the last 2 nights we've been, kept awake by some pretty insane wind and rain, and just everything's been canceled. Gyms canceled, work's canceled, school's canceled. So that's what we're dealing with right now.
It's been that bad that, you've had floods. I saw on the news now, like there's floods and there's people driving through, like half the cars are full of water. I'm like, wait, hang on. Lauren lives in Fort Lauderdale.
That's where those big pimped out trucks come handy, right? So you can climb into your car. You don't have to climb down. Well, it is flooding. Remember, we live in a tropical swamp. There's not really anywhere for the water to go. But it subsides. It's subsiding a little bit, but I think there's a little bit more weather in store, and then we're in the clear for next week, sunny skies. So happy about that. We've also obviously had our presidential elections just pass through on November 3rd. So
what I want to preface before you start is like, what the hell's happening in America?
Good question. If you figure it out, let me know.
So what's interesting is, and you and I have chatted offline about this quite a lot. You're from South Africa. You've lived in the United States for 15 years already. So you're a South African American, right?
I am.
You've been there enough to kind of solidify that name, I think. One of the key things that you notice, even from the electoral map that you see online, is that, and this is one of the conversations we've had, is how very divided the country is.
Yes.
Right? Yes. And I think it speaks to the times of, and I don't know if there's a bigger spiritual message that needs to be heard, or not sure, but the more we look at it, the more it slowly starts, something's happening, right? One of the things that you have often said is South Africa is far more ahead of the US than we realize. It's a big statement. And I've always kind of went, okay, I can like where's this going? But one of the notable things that you've mentioned quite specifically about this election is suddenly, because there's a female vice president that might be elected, now it's the world's biggest news. But the world has been doing this everywhere. The world currently has world presidents that are female. And that was just one simple example you used to kind of go, well, the world's done this. Why is this such a big thing? And I think the world has always looked at the US as the forerunners, the people that make it happen, the ones that lead by example. And yet, you living there, you have a very, very different scenario. You have a very different take on what's happening in America. And that's the beauty about your position, because you have the complete juxtaposition of what South Africa's gone through, where we're at, how it's going here. and suddenly you're in a new country that's sort of only going through stuff that we've already gone through, right? Give us some insights on, like, how is that all playing out? Because it's quite interesting.
It's so I mean, I first want to say that I love both of these countries. There are extremely magical things about both of these countries, and I both know, like, sometimes we'll talk about the amazing South Africa, and everyone's like, yeah, but I heard it's this crazy place. And I'm like, but that's away from the fact that it's an amazing place too. You know, there's perspective. Now, I like to look at different perspectives, and really I draw everything just from my own experience in my own life and reading and doing some research. So I love both of these countries. What's interesting is when you come here, you can talk all day long. People will not be able to understand what you went through in your country of origin. It's just something that they can't understand, and we should not even expect them to really understand the full, you know, concept of that. But vice versa as well. When I'm talking to South Africans and I hear them discussing politics in America, I can see that they are fitting it on to their own situation. They're fitting it to their own size. And I have to always remind them that it's not quite the same. And why would it be the same? No, politics is the same everywhere. But that doesn't mean there aren't similarities. So yes, when I came to America, and this is a story that I have to tell because this is what happened. This is what happened to me almost weekly, if not twice or three times, sometimes every day of the week. I was working in a school, a very high-end school, and people would come to me and they would whisper in my ear, "Did you run away from the Black people?" And I was floored. And the only response I had was, "You don't know who you're talking to."
Yeah.
Because I was like, absolutely not, you know, but what I noticed was, instead of, you know, focusing so much on the actual conversation and what they were saying, I noticed that people were not talking to each other. Black and white people were not talking. They weren't mixing. I almost got my butt kicked in a club one night because I rolled up to the bar. There were 3 Black women at the bar. I was like, "Yeah, what's up, sisters?" And well, apparently I was not one of these sisters. But go back to South Africa, roll up to 3 Black chicks at the bar, and we'd be like, you know, grinding on the floor, dancing and, you know, doing a shot. Like, it was, these weird, like, contrasts, and it confused me a great deal. And so I started realizing I had a platform to say something, because I'm starting to see these 2 very different worlds collide for me personally. So when I say things like America is a little behind, they're really not behind anybody. But what I want to say is they're a young country. You know, we've been doing a lot of things out there in Africa and in Europe, even as politically, and Africa is a very interesting melting pot for politics, and it goes back a really long time. America is an insane melting pot of human beings, a lot of human beings that come from other places in the world.
Yeah, so multicultural, like it's like,
yeah, and everybody's bringing their country of origin with them and their value systems, and now it's become very divided. When I arrived, it was a lot less divided. Now I'm seeing this unbelievable division. So yes, there's a lot going on, and I would like to, you know, congratulate Joe Biden on his presidential election. And as president-elect, I look forward to, you know, seeing what the Democratic Party comes up with. But I do have, and yes, great congratulations to Kamala Harris, Vice President-elect. She has really taken a massive step for America. You know, she's the first woman to sit in any sort of presidential seat as vice president. So this is, you know, an amazing example for girls and women and people worldwide. But I have the opposite on the other ends of all of these things as well. I got some questions, you know.
Yeah.
Questions.
So I think, politically, Joe Biden probably made a really, really smart move in choosing a South, I think she's South Asian American, as Wikipedia puts it, South Asian American. um, that's not. She's a woman of color, and now she's. I mean, she's a very educated woman. Absolutely granted that, but I think he made a really smart move in saying, you know what, to prove that I want to make some changes, he used her. But
Yeah.
on the flip side of that, the truth of the matter is, she's a woman, and America has never done it. America has
Yes.
never put someone in a position like that is female.
Yeah,
And
we tried last time, of course, Hillary.
And they wouldn't have it, yeah.
No,
and I think the meaning behind it is far greater than I think a lot of people might realize at this point, because essentially it does, and I think if I look at Donald Trump's vice president, I don't even, Mike Pence.
Yeah, I mean, I get it.
Like you've never heard him. Well, I've never heard him speak. I'm sure he speaks, but he says very little. Doesn't have much of a voice, and I think this time round people have seen that potentially there could be some strategy in why Joe Biden chose her, but also I think she does represent something of what possibly is the future. For me, I'm like, yay, let's have lots of women presidents. I think women deal with stress far better than men do. I think there's some science to prove that as well. But essentially,
it's true.
It's that meaning, right? It's that meaning that's been given to what potentially is possible.
Yeah, and look, there was definitely a hype when Hillary was running for president last round, and now the strategy was a great one for sure. People love Kamala, and she's married also to a white man, which diversifies her background even more. He's very proud of her. They have a great marriage. She's got 2 little girls. I think they might be twins, or she's got 2 little kids. So yes, and I don't want to take away from that. And I'm definitely not telling anybody not to be inspired by that.
Yeah, I think it's a smart move. I really do. I think it's really clever.
Absolutely. I think what I'm seeing, and this is where everything comes to me, is when I'm just sitting watching what's going on. And as a professional photographer, you look at pictures sometimes, they can be very nuanced and they can be manipulated. But what I've been noticing, just from my own chair, from my own seat in life, there's been a lot of congratulations for President-elect Joe Biden. And, the memes are coming out, and I see a lot of congratulations and pictures, like, congratulations. So it says, congratulations, President-elect Joe Biden, but it's a picture of Kamala Harris. So I'm already onto the subliminals. I know the media does this on purpose. I know because I used to be part of it. And I'm just interested, of the 10 pictures I saw yesterday, 8 of them said, congratulations, President-elect Joe Biden, but it was a picture of Kamala Harris on stage, or a picture with, both of them, which would make sense, because congratulations to both of them.
Yeah.
But I think what my brain picks up on is, and it's not a negative statement, it's more like, ooh, look over there. What did I notice there?
Yeah.
I'm not permanently in the devil's advocate seat. Just, when it pops up, I'm like, oh, hold on, what happened there? So I notice this interesting perspective from the media and coming out with pictures and imagery to like let people see certain things. And I want to give it its glory days, but since we're discussing it, I was doing a little research, and the first female president in the world was from Rwanda. She was a Rwandan president. And something that I didn't even realize, she was president before South Africa even got their democracy.
Sure.
You know, in 1994. She was president in 1993, and she was even assassinated in 1994. So she was actually the first female. They called her Madam Agatha. Her last name is quite complicated. And I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. And then I did a little bit more research. And I mean, we're looking currently at, there's been about 66 female leaders, president leaders in the world. And currently we're sitting at about 22 leaders. So if there's 195 countries in the world, you know, you're looking at about an eighth of the world is run by women.
Yeah.
And if you look at those countries, they're all quite diverse. You know, some of them are in Asia, some of them are in Europe, some of them in Africa, you know, like that's a place, I guess, often we just didn't, you know, we haven't seen that happen in South Africa yet. So it's interesting to see that. So the only thing that I sometimes wonder is, are we a little behind? And
yeah, it didn't occur to me until you mentioned that. It didn't occur to me until you said, you know, like the world's been doing this all the time, and you know, there are so many women presidents in the world already, and I'm going, yeah, that's really true. You know, so it's quite strange that now suddenly America's doing it. That suddenly it's this thing, but I think it's
well for us here for sure.
Yeah,
but worldwide. You know,
it's been happening for so long already.
It sounds like a conversation we've been having just for a really long time, and like the conversation's kind of, for me, I'm like, okay, but how long will we talk about this? You know, like we need to give her due, and she's going to go all the way. And I might be all for a Kamala for president one day. It's just that I'm wondering, how fast does America really move when they do things? Because right now, what we're actually dealing with is a complete handover of presidency. And I was reading this morning, I know this came in from an accountant, right? Yeah. What does this mean for our next tax year? Now, things change so dramatically now. And then the next 4 years, they change dramatically back again. Yeah. And then dramatically back again. And I don't think we get far. You know, I don't know how far forward we go with this massive switch of law and hands every 4 years or every 8 years. You know, yeah. I'm not suggesting we make it a 3-term presidency, but I'm curious to know, how do we bring people together even though we're so divided? How do we navigate just our daily lives, knowing that now my taxes are all going to be affected, my life is affected, I don't know how my state is affected by this. Changing from one massive party to another, you know, it's very unnerving. And I think a lot of Americans are living with what a lot of South Africans have lived with their entire lives, the unknown.
Yeah, I mean, and then I think that's, you know, we've mentioned it before, is South Africans have this way of really being certain about the uncertain.
Yeah.
And we know that it's real. We know that it happens all the time. We know that it's, I mean, for power cuts, like you and I have spoken about power cuts. No one, like in the US, when you say, oh no, we've got load shedding, no one knows what we're talking about, right?
No, it's crazy.
South Africans have become accustomed to having change at such a regular pace that we're accustomed to change easily. And I think you mentioned earlier the Ubuntu that South Africans practice and that we live by and that we just know
inherently. Yeah.
Even though I'm a white South African, we're both white South Africans. We know the essence and the sense of it.
Absolutely.
We've seen it, we've experienced it, we've been to school with people who've lived by it, you know. So
yeah, it runs through our veins.
Across Africa, you know, so you've experienced even more than I have in terms of what that is. And I don't think I mean, and you would know, like, do Americans know what Ubuntu even is? Do they have a sense of, I remember like watching a documentary. I must get the name, but there's an actual documentary about coaches on Netflix, where the head coach was speaking to his team, mentioning the importance of Ubuntu.
Oh yes, it's a great one, actually. Yeah,
yeah.
I actually watched that the other day, and I forget the name too.
So I mean, do you guys know it? Do they know what that means? That spirit of togetherness, that I see you because you see that whole sense of seeing each other.
I feel like this is something that, and listen, when I'm talking, I'm really generalizing. I mean, you can't put everybody under the same umbrella, but as a society, I feel like America is learning that more and more. And this is what I mean by that. You know, when I first arrived here, I felt a great level of autonomy by Americans. Everybody was autonomous on their own mission, which in South Africa is the same. You wake up every day and you're on your own mission. But some in our brain, somehow in the way we've been, it's that African spirit, tribal spirit. We just know we're a tribe. We just know it. Outright from the day you're born, we don't always get along. Our tribes don't get along very well always. But we know we're in it together, one way or the other, which is why worse things didn't happen, I guess, at the time in South Africa when we became a democracy. But we're still working as South Africans. Like, we are not a perfect country, not even close. And, you know, just as we go forward, we feel like we're going backwards. So I feel like we're all actually going forward. Everybody's going forward in the world. And I feel like Americans are learning to get together, even if it is currently in protest and this and that. And they're learning to be open. And the one thing, they're learning to be vulnerable. This is something that I notice a lot, and I'm just going to put it out there. People think that because I'm a vulnerable person, that I'm weak or easy or easy to manipulate, or no, my vulnerability is grace. It's kind of, you know, like if you ever felt God's grace, like it's the ability to talk regardless of whether we agree, but I allow you to say your piece in my presence without judgment. You know, that is not an easy thing. And I think being vulnerable is something that's it's going to happen anyway, because now people's buttons are being pushed. So, you know, I think that Americans are learning to be vulnerable, learning to deal with their emotions. We did not have a choice but to deal with a lot of our emotions, and half of them we shoved down anyway. But we were kind of faced with crazy realities, which now we're being faced with here in America in very different ways. You know, we lived in segregation, which is a whole other type of mind bend to get around.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, it's
here's a question. Do you think that Americans live under a facade, or do you think they, and I know that's a big statement, so I wouldn't say maybe like a facade, but like it's good for people to think, we think that American has their shit together. Is that the case? Because, you know, if you look at social media, and if you look at, it depends on where you're looking, right? But if you look at it, I mean, the one key thing that just stands out for me is how your current president struggles to put sentences together. You know, like like that to me is just like, so if you're going to be a leader of sorts, just at least be able to make sense and have some fact to back it up. You know, so, but anyway, back to the question. Like, do you think the Americans have a facade of like we're okay, and in the foundation of that we're not?
I think there was a moment. There was a moment during the pandemic. I woke up one day and I just realized America was different. Today, America changed. And that was when some unrest started, and the movement started, and Black Lives Movement and all that. And it wasn't because of the movement. It was a collection of energies that I was like, I could feel that as an American living in America, I felt suddenly unsettled. So I would say that people have different levels of awareness and interest. Some people have completely switched off, because listening to the mainstream media is impossible. And, you know, there are people living in, people really don't understand how big this country is. There's people living in places that the news doesn't travel very fast to. You know, the way news is disseminated into this country is very different from the way it's disseminated outside the country. So we don't often, we get the news that we're told. And so some people, you know, we don't want to go by that anymore, so we just hide under a rock. But some people have been doing that forever, since the day they, you know, were born, 5 generations on. You know, there's places in America where they're just realizing that Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California. So
Yes.
I'm not making fun of them. I'm just saying that
People, yeah, I mean, certain areas just don't do it. Yeah.
There's information that's traveling fast to some places, especially the outsides, but the insides are not getting it quite as quickly. And here's the thing, the information that's being disseminated these days, I'm not sure is accurate. And people are starting to feel that their safety net has been disrupted. Our safety, our general sense of safety as Americans, and I'll speak for myself, feels like it's been a little disrupted. Do I feel afraid? No. Is there a civil war going on, like they said last week? No. There's a bit of unrest, but I feel like Americans will figure it out. There are a lot of people coming forward and they're saying, you know, it doesn't matter what side we're on, let's hug and make up. It doesn't matter. But then there's still a lot of people who are like, he won. And then there's another side that's like, well, we'll let the courts decide because it was fraudulent. And, you know, what if that is true? What if that is true? You know, I ask myself, what if it's not true? It does sound like someone throwing a tantrum. But you know those moments sometimes where something looks like one thing, but it's actually another? Yeah. I think those moments are going to start showing up a lot more in our space here in America. So it's hard to know what's real and what's not real, to be very honest.
What's interesting is I saw an interview on 60 Minutes Australia last night where I don't know what her name is right now, but she's a bit of a whistleblower about being on the Trump campaign. And sadly, from her point of view, and this is purely her perspective, she was saying that it hasn't even become, or it hasn't even been representative of the Republican Party. It's become a Trump party, where everything Trump says and does and allows and changes his mind to do is based on what Trump wants to do. It's got nothing to do with, you know. So like when you hear different reports like that the whole time, and you're kind of going, I think that's you know, there's that Afrikaans saying, as daar rookie is daar vuurtjie, you know, like if there's some smoke burning, you know. So the other thing is,
that's true.
I think the one thing that Joe Biden did say, which I think he's going to have to prove, and I think he's going to have to work really hard to do, is even though you didn't vote for me, I will be a president for everyone. And I think it's a big statement, and he's going to have to really, really work at that.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that he said it, puts it out there, it puts it into the ether, and it's a kind of going, okay, dude, so you're there now. If that's the case, show us, you know.
So this is an interesting thing. Normally, I'd say yes, now that he said it. But I would say that after the last 12 years of American politics, nothing any president says really has that same level of credibility that it used to. Okay, so, and I want to just mention that, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire, which is what we're saying in Afrikaans. But what if that fire was burning down something that was bad or didn't work for you?
Yeah.
So we can't say fire is bad, you know. Anywhere where you see a fire happening, you know, with this analogy, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It means something is burning down. But some things are meant to burn down. So all I'm saying is, from this interesting perspective, here's another perspective. I hope that Joe Biden will, go ahead and do exactly, because it might be the first time in history that any president actually accomplishes that, doing what they actually said they were actually going to do. But it's in that we're learning very interesting. So you mentioned that this woman, I'd love to interview, comes along and she talks about Trump and it wasn't a Republican. No, Trump's been a Democrat his whole life. He became and there's a lot of information behind the scenes that we don't get. I mean, even President-elect Joe Biden has run for presidency, I think 2 or 3 times already in his life. So there's a long history there. But, Trump, I think, I don't love or hate the guy. So, take it from that perspective, from just what I see is when I'm looking at him, and you say he wasn't a Democrat or a Republican agenda. He was a Trump agenda.
Yeah.
But I think that's why he is and was so popular, is because half of America cannot identify as a Democrat or a Republican. What those people see is a political system that is so old and outdated that it no longer works. Anything that you hear on top of that is just regurgitation of the same machine. So what's an interesting perspective is, okay, Donald Trump came in and was literally the bull in the china shop, trademark Lauren Britz, because he kind of like jumped into the Chinese. And a lot of people believe that, there's an attachment with the Democrats and the Chinese. So what was interesting was, yes. That's why he was so popular, because he was not representing either of those agendas. It was a time for a new agenda. And a lot of us Americans would love a new agenda. We would love not to be called Democratic. We would love not to be called Republican. We need something else that represents who we are. Yeah. We feel like we need new technology. And I think with him coming in and breaking it down, the technology that doesn't work, that's what made him so popular. And it speaks to a great need of American people. I cannot call myself a Democrat. It makes me cringe. And I cannot call myself a Republican. That makes me cringe. So it is no wonder that Donald Trump was not acquiescing to either of those agendas. There was definitely an agreement between him and the Republicans to push both of their agendas, I'm sure, because how else was he going to become the nominee for the Republicans, having been a Democrat his whole life? It's strategic, it's politics. I think what America's looking for is something a little more human. And I know that doesn't come across necessarily in Donald Trump, because it's hard to relate to a man like that. But what does it take to break down the world's biggest old technology?
Yeah, no, I completely hear that story. I think it's a very logical approach to looking at that, because who says that like you have to be left or you have to be right? Why can't we just be something that's completely none of those and something new?
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
To a large degree, that may be the appeal that he had. I just wish he would be able to formulate sentences.
He needed some refining. He needed some refining. But I think that was the appeal. And I think he said the spot, at least, nevertheless, whatever, comes next.
The question is, so how do we fix it, right? So when I say we, I mean, what is the conversations that we need to start having? And that's why you and I have these conversations, is to build awareness and start piquing people's interest, right? One of the things that come up is the resilience. You mentioned Ubuntu. You've mentioned the America being a little bit behind the times in taking on change and getting their brains on board with what that looks like and behaves like. And so do you think resilience is probably a big kickoff point where people need to start really getting their brains on board with? Like, what does it take to go, okay,
I
cool,
think
we're here now. How do we get up? How do we get used to the uncertainty, and how do we get to the certainty of the uncertainty? Because I think that's probably a big conversation to be had.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the people on the ground, us here as citizens, we are the most important. And how are we going to manage our lives? How are we going to treat our neighbors? You know, currently there's a lot of people not talking to each other. We know how this goes in South Africa as well. And it's very weird here because now it's really crept into the family. Like, you have divided families. And I think people, even though many people are happy and many people are sad, I think there's a general feeling of holding your breath still. Like, what's going to happen next? Like, I heard someone here, that a woman I know, say it here yesterday, like, I'm happy he won, but now I'm still holding my breath. Why? And I think there's nothing we can do about it. Unless you want to go into politics, there's nothing we can do about, other than voting and doing our due diligence as citizens. We can only manage our now. We have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, next week. But we can manage it, and we can actually say to ourselves, listen, let's build some resilience instead of resistance. And maybe just to give a clear indication between these two things, because, you know, resistance is not going to help, where resilience is going to be extremely helpful, I think. So definitely give us some tips on that, Kev.
So, I mean, the first thing, you know, because I mean, I've been doing this training now. I've been doing research for training, and I've just recently had really good success with doing some resilience training for a big insurer in South Africa. They don't sponsor the show yet, so
Ding ding, this could be your spot.
yes, your ad could be right here. But amazing feedback that I've had from them. And do you know what's one of the key things, the theme of the story that we've had running through the training was, you have the ability to be the hero of your story.
Yes.
And then, you know, the moment you just take 5 minutes to kind of sit down and go, if I am the hero of my story, like, what is that? What does that mean? What does the hero behave like? Who do I become? So like, that's the first point. The second one is being able to forgive. Not only forgive yourself, your past moments, life, situations, but to be able to have the tolerance for other things, other people, other moments, other situations.
Right.
When you get your brain wrapped around what forgiveness and tolerance serves you, yeah, your higher self steps into gear, right?
Yeah.
And I think around forgiveness, tolerance, and really becoming the hero of your story, I mean, it's a big sort of collection of the points. But I think that those 3 points really speak to how to get through tough times. You know, a part of the stories that I've shared through this was the moments, and I think you and I have spoken about it before, in who is the hero of the stories. And when you recognize a moment of despair, or you recognize a moment where circumstances, life, a situation that you're caught up in, forces you to become small.
Yeah.
And in that moment, to reach for more, right? And I mean, like, we've spoken about it before, but it's still, you know, I look at America right now, and I think the underlying message of all of it, like, if you made, and, you know, in my humble opinion, like, what are people reaching for? What is bigger than this moment right now?
Right.
What could you become? Who could you become? How do you put that, go from step A to step B? How do you put those two together? And what needs to happen for you to be able to get there?
Yeah.
Because
Definitely.
once you wrap your brain around that, I think people people take a moment to really start thinking, oh, wow. You know, another point just to add to this is loving yourself. And you and I have spoken about this often, you know, the importance of loving yourself and why loving yourself lends itself to how it shows up for other people and how that influences outcomes, right? And not loving
Yeah, I mean, I
yourself
think,
in a malicious kind of way, loving yourself and kind of going, yeah, you know, I'm good, I'm doing well, look at what I'm doing, I celebrate little successes, look at your performances, look at, you know, what's happening in your world, look at the elections and go, wow, okay, this is the whole brand new kind of day for me. How do I do what I'm doing? How do I become the hero of that story? Right.
yeah, I
So
think, you know, yesterday I was sitting and I was pondering through this information, and I was like, you know, then the tax guy called, he's like, this is going to change everything. And I'm like, fear mongering me on the taxes already. But anyway, and I was like, and I was sitting thinking, you know, I don't really have any feelings. The only thing I feel right now is uncertain. So if everyone's feeling a little bit like me, or maybe they're feeling really certain about their future, or whatever the case is, let's just remember one thing, that all we have is right now. Right now is the only thing that exists. Nothing else exists. Nothing else is in existence yet. Right now is the only thing. So yes, becoming the hero of your own story will definitely require you to take care of yourself. And I just had this flashback of Jerry Springer. Do you remember Jerry Springer?
yes.
We used to watch Jerry Springer as kids on TV because it was like one of the only things they'd give us. But
Yes.
we had, he would always say at the end, and he was actually, I think, a clinical psychologist, and he would always say in the end, take care of yourself and each other. It was almost like he was just showing what people can be like, but he was actually really trying for them to be better. Like, we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to take care of our brothers and sisters and each other. You know, I think that we need to take more charge of our life. And so that way you can become the hero of your own life. What you think, how you have conversations, who you talk to, who you don't. I think forgiveness is very important. I do think in this case it's mostly important when it's about you, forgiving yourself for things, forgiving, you know, things that are in your world. And I do want to caveat that with, I don't personally believe that you have to forgive everybody, everything all the time, must forgive in order to be happy. I don't think that's true. But I think that by starting to forgive yourself for things you've done, that can be very handy. Like things in your life that you know you can overcome, go for it, you know. If there are more difficult things, we deal with those in more delicate ways. But definitely forgiving yourself and allowing yourself to go forward. You know, allow yourself your abundance. That is your birthright as a human being, really. And also
Lars, on forgiveness. So, you know, in terms of the opposition, you know, like, oh,
yes.
you're a Republican, I'm this,
Right.
you're that, you know, you're black, I'm white, kind of like that whole, just like the tolerance that goes in, kind of going, you know what, if you just base today's existence on everything that's happened in your past, you'll just live by those rules forever.
100%. Yes.
So
yes.
take the time to get your brain wrapped around, like if you just forgave it for a second and said, okay, you know, there has been differences in black and white culture, and just stop for a second and go, okay, cool, how can I just be tolerant of you like 5% more than I was yesterday? And just like stop and
Definitely.
kind of go, okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of videos, you know, sent out about people arguing in, you know, department stores and all sorts of places, and it is often racial, but it's also now very party driven. And there's a million things. I mean, we could sit all day long and discuss why and why not we shouldn't. But it's true. If we can just find in ourselves a place where we would like people to accept us a little more, and take that same space and offer it to somebody else that we find intolerant. It doesn't mean you have to tolerate people that are hurting you, is the only thing I want to say. But from a political perspective and from a world perspective and a life perspective, all we have is now. And we change the narrative. We need to change the narrative, actually, each of us, and change it to a more productive conversation. It would be pointless for me to have a conversation about why and how I voted. It's never going to be okay with the opposition, ever. You know, it's like religion. It's just not going to happen. But what can we do? We can cultivate understanding and perspective. And we can do that by just, like you say, practicing some self-forgiveness and saying, you know what, I'm sorry for whatever I've done, and actually point out a couple of things, become self-reflective. And extend that to somebody. Nobody has to show up in perfection. Nobody gets to show up in perfection before they are worthy. Nobody. And do you know how powerful grace is? Have you ever felt grace over your life when you just totally screwed up and life was just messy and you totally messed it up, and then all of a sudden grace appears and you're like, oh my God, this is just amazing. We can offer that same grace that, you know, we are often by our Creator and our world and our universe and our meditations, etc. You know, I think that is a very important factor. And to just change the dialogue a little bit, let's talk about it. You know, if you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. Let's talk about something we do have in common. Yeah. Because there is still a lot that we have in common. A lot.
I think, you know, if people took the time, they would realize that they have more in common than they don't. Especially when it comes to like foundational, like you're human, I'm human, you're feeling, I'm feeling, you have love, I have love. There is so much more that you have in common than you don't have in common, which is it's a sad reality, but most people don't realize it.
Well, I think, you know, what this morning I was thinking about something we spoke about before. It's that thing. What prevents people from shifting? It's not about see my perspective or see my perspective, but what prevents people from shifting? It's that thing that we previously termed laziness, but it's really not laziness. It's something. Although some people are, given. But for most humans, it's like they're held back almost in a very psychological way, and I think that it's an opportunity for us to all cognitive dissonance in a way. Like it's, you know, this is what people are experiencing. And they vote party lines and they don't do their research. I mean, I voted across both parties, to be quite honest. I had some in this section, some in this section, because I sat down for half a day, but then it took half a day. You know, politics is complicated. But at the same time, you know, we have now available to talk about it, and we do have a lot in common. If we just took the time to unhook our perspective that is so staunch that it won't move ever, and just to listen, we might learn something quite incredible.
The last thing I want to share with people today is your DMO. What is your DMO, right? And your DMO is your daily method of operation.
Nice.
So it's a so it's a little practical tool that I share that gives you an idea of how to break down your daily method of operation. But the moment you get your brain on board with what that looks like, I'm talking about being the hero, living in forgiveness and tolerance of people, and having that kind of mindset. But part of that is, so what is the method of operation? So if you had all of these facets, and how do you do it constructively on a daily basis? What is your DMO, right? And when you start thinking about it, you kind of go, yeah, so, what does my daily method of operation look like? Does that work for me? Is that really conducive to the world I want to live in? Or isn't it? And if it's not, change it. It's your daily method of operation. You have the ability to change that. And the more you get to think about it, what's my DMO? The more you start churning out, who am I becoming? Who is the hero of the story? So that's what I'm going to leave you with for today, Lon. What is your last Your last
That's amazing.
sentiments for today.
I've never heard that before, and I'm going to keep that. What is your DMO? I like that. That's really cool. I think for me, what I would say to anybody who's out there, whether you're celebrating or mourning this election, or still trying to accept, what the outcome is, however it goes, I think just, be graceful. Be graceful, and by that I mean allow your neighbor an opportunity to talk to you without judgment. And if that gets too hectic, have some boundaries, or maybe just say things like, do you mind us talking about something else, something that we maybe have in common, or something that is joyful? Or, it doesn't have to be ugly or nasty or confrontational. And right now emotions are really high. So, people's emotions are high. They're, again, like the last time, they're getting rid of their families, they're breaking up and all these types, they're not talking to their friends. But really, you know what, guys? I think America's going to be okay. I think the world is going to be okay if every person takes the now that they have and does the very best they can with it. And one of those things is to remember that it's important that you take action in your own life, but that you are essentially part of the collective. And being gracious to your neighbor is essentially being gracious to yourself. There's a caveat, like you don't have to tolerate everybody's BS, but you know what I'm saying. Like for the majority, just go out there and be gracious. Be a gracious person. Don't be a fool. Be gracious.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining me on Lunchtime Stories and hashtag Candid Conversation with my cousin. And thank you for joining me. And I will chat to you next week.
Thank you, Kev. It's great seeing you again. Have a great one.
Later. Bye.
Bye.